Afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be looking at profitability, and this is a build up on the fundamental concepts we've looked at in the past couple of weeks. We've looked at cost estimate, we've looked at time value of money, and we've also looked at cash flow and the representation of cash flows using cash flow diagrams. Profitability is essential for any business because you need to assess to know if the business will be able to sustain itself. Otherwise, if it's going to be if it's going to be economically viable. So you want to know if it's worth investing in the business, if it's worth executing the business or not well ahead of time. Remember, the assumption is always that when you have a capital, you have several options of investments as well. So you have different opportunities that you can channel the capital to. So it's essential for you to assess the profitability potential of each opportunity before you invest. So in today's class, we'll be looking at two different sections. The first section is profitability standards. So when you talk about standard, standard has to do with a goal. It's a goal, it's a target. It's a bar. You're saying that you need to ensure that you meet up with this standard. Otherwise, you shouldn't invest at all. So and the S, oftentimes when you have options, the S, what your target is to go above or beyond what the goal is. Anything below that, what that is saying is the investment is not worth pursuing. So it's essential to always go above that. So, and oftentimes these profitability standards are expressed in percentages. So it's expressed in percentages, and the essence is that it's not just about making profit, but it's about efficiency. How quickly can you make the profit? What is the speed of generating the profit? So it's not just about looking at the magnitude of a profit once off. You want to look at how the profit generation, is it steady? Is it consistent? Those are the things you want to look at. So let's look at example 27. There are two scenarios here. Scenario A: 100,000 Rand investment yields a profit of 10,000 Rand per annum, while investment B has R1,000,000 yielding 25,000 profit per year. If you were to look at the magnitudes of the profit, you say that option B generates a bigger profit, and option A generates a lesser profit. But if we are to look at the efficiency, you see that option A actually has a higher efficiency or a higher return on investment, which is 10%, as compared to B, which has a 2.5% return. So what this tells us is that option A is a better investment. But we should also bear in mind that before we make the final decision, there are other things we need to assess. And one of those things is to assess the risk of the investment. So in this particular case, our assumption is that the option A is not significantly more risky. So that's a safe assumption. When we get into the next couple of lectures where we look at probability statistics and probability distribution, we'll see the different ways by which we can measure risk. One of the key ways is the Monte Carlo distribution, but we'll be looking at that later on. So that's the safe assumption you need to make. The implication of and that's one thing to take note of. The implication of this choice is that if you invest, so if you had a million rand, so I'd rather go for Option A, invest 100,000 and 900,000 can be put in other alternatives. So let's start with the measures of a profitability standard. The very first one is cost of capital. Cost of capital. So for this one, your cost of capital must earn at least it must earn at least a particular rate. And if you take note, if you remember when we were looking at time value of money, we talked about interest rate and the rest. So cost of capital is synonymous to your interest rate. So what you're saying in essence is that the bare minimum in terms of the performance of an investment is it must at least be able to pay the interest of the investment. So before you can accept it or not. So before you can accept it or not. The second one, which you'll be looking at, is the minimum acceptable rate of return. Remember, like I said earlier on, these two things we have first the A and B that we are first looking at as standards. So these standards are usually set by the companies. So each company or each industry has its own standard. And before they delve into any investment, they first have to compare the performances of the different investments with what their standards are. So the next one is the minimum acceptable rate of return. This is a commonly used one. As we indicated in the previous slides, it's usually expressed as a percentage per year. And one of the key things is that we need to ensure that the MAR is adjusted. The main thing is we need to ensure that it's adjusted it's adjusted to cater for the risk associated with the investment. So we need to ensure that it's adjusted to do that. So in projects where more capital is invested in equipment or plant construction, the capital is not liquid, so it's not easily recoverable. So that's why you need to ensure that all these different risks associated with investment is catered for. So oftentimes you can either this MAR is usually the best is usually the commonly used measure of profitability standard. Before I move on to the next section of the class, I want you to take a look at table 1. You see that just to show you the fact that you need to always always cater for the risk associated with an investment. You see that the higher the risk, the higher the MAR. And you see that the risk are highest when everything is new, unlike when you're just making changes, when you're incorporating certain changes here and there. For example, new capacity or new product entering into an established market. You see that in all these cases, there was something established. It was just a bit of a modification. But in this particular case, everything is new. Hence, you need to ensure that the MARR is very high. So in the next couple of slides, we'll be looking at the measures of profitability. So it's these measures that we'll be comparing with our standards to see if we measure up or not. These measures of profitability are divided into two groups. The first group are the ones that are time value dependent. They are the ones that are time value dependent. That means they consider the impact of time value of money. Remember, in terms of depreciation, in terms of interest. And then the other group are the ones that do not consider time value of money. So they are called non-discounted techniques. Examples of the non-discounted techniques, or the ones that do not consider time value of money, are your return on investment, payback period, and net return. So for this method, straight line depreciation method is often used when it comes to the time value of the equipment, not the time value of money this time around. And then the second one, we have the NPV, which is your net present value, and then we have the discounted cash flow rate of return, which we'll be looking at in the next couple of slides. So as I said earlier on, so you need to, oftentimes you believe that before you make the final decision, there are definitely several alternatives that you'll be considering. So you can't talk about making a decision when you just have one option. But when it comes to business, you always have it at the back of your mind that there are several opportunities, and you want to pick the one with the highest measure of attractiveness. That's what you are aiming at. So the very first one, which doesn't depend on time value of money, it's very simple. It's called return on investment. And in order to calculate this, all you need to do is just to calculate the net profit. And remember, your net profit, you need to have made sure that you've accounted for other outputs, your taxes, etc. So after calculating your net profit, you know what your once-off investment value is. So it's a ratio of the net profit and the investment. It's a very simple calculation. Let's look at an example to make sense of that. Example 28. So calculate the return on investment for a project. I want to take note of this key word or key phrase, new product. So if it's a new product from table 1 that we saw earlier on, it means the risk is very high. So the next part of the question says the fixed capital of investment is 90,000 and no working capital has been incorporated into this. So it means that if working capital was incorporated into this, you might need to deduct that from the fixed capital investment. And the average annual profit is 30,000. So if you look at that, that will be 30. So if you look at the percentage, as we saw in the previous slide, we say that it's net profit divided by investment. So if you look at that, 30,000 divided by 90,000, that will give us a percentage of 33%. And if you were to go back to the previous slide, sorry about that. If you were to go back to the previous couple of slides where we looked at this slide, table 1, you see that the percentage we got, which is 33%, falls within this range. So since if it falls within this range, we can say that the investment is acceptable. So the next measure of profitability that I'll be looking at is payback period. As we saw in lecture slide 4A, you remember that payback period is the time between the initial investment, and the time the business breaks even. So from the time during initial investment, the cash flows are negative. But once you break even, everything equalizes. And beyond break even period, you now start having positive cash flow. So the period between the original investment and when the investment and the investment and profit, everything equalizes. So that period is called your payback period. So the principle is, how fast can I recover my initial investment? So what this means is you want to have as short payback period as possible. You want to have a short payback period. That's the intention. When you have two alternatives or more, so you want to compare which one has the shortest before you make the final decision. But remember, just like the previous measure, the ROI, this one also does not consider the time value of money. So because it doesn't consider time value of money, it means that the different risk associated with efficiency of profitability is not accounted for. So if you refer to, so this is the mathematical calculation of your payback period, but I've done something that is more explicit. If you please refer to your tutorial 3, which was shared on the WhatsApp platform. So if you look at that, it's more explicit. We looked at a couple of examples there, so that's more explicit, and that's going to show you how you calculate your PBP mathematically. But there's also a qualitative way of looking at this. The qualitative way is for you to first, let's look at example 29, is to first look at the cumulative cash flow. Remember what we saw in lecture slides 4a when we're looking at the cash flows. We said cumulative cash flow will always take into consideration what the cash flow was in the previous year. We'll always look at what happened in the previous year. So the first thing you do is you populate the cumulative cash flow. If you were to look at this second column, you see that we had negative cumulative cash flows from the start of the project, year 0, up until year 2. And then in year 3, we have positive cash flow. So it means that the point at which there was a break-even time will be somewhere here. So that's between year 2 and 3. But remember, as I said, this one this estimation cannot give us an exact value. So that's why you need to refer to what we looked at in tutorial 3. So the next measure that we'll be looking at, which is often used by many companies, is the net present value. Net present value. And regarding this, what makes this different from the previous examples, A and B, return on investment and PBP, is that this considers time value of money. It considers time value of money. If you remember in the lecture slides 3a, we said that when you consider time value of money, money in the future has less value except if interest is incorporated. So for this reason, it's essential to look at the net present worth, or the net present value of any investment. So you need to look at that. So we want to look at the amount that needs to be set aside today at the appropriate interest rate in order to accumulate the target amount by the payment day. So before you so having forecasted, remember what we looked at in the estimate, the cash flows and the rest, having forecasted what will be happening in the next couple of years over the period for which the business will be taking place. Having forecasted those values, you need to now discount those values into the present time, or time 0. So that's the first thing you need to have at the back of your mind when we start looking at the calculations. The next thing that you need to bear in mind when we look at the calculation is, as the name is, it says net. Whenever you are considering the net of anything, you're talking about the sum. So the sum we'll be looking at is all the benefits and all the costs. All the benefits and all the costs. So benefits, what is incoming, your incomes, the cost, what you're disbursing, the money going out of the business. Refer to the cash flows that we looked at in lecture slides 4a. Let's look at example 30 and for us to be able to understand this better. So remember, as I said, the first thing is you forecasted what will be happening with the investment over the period of the business. So from time zero, the initial investment, up until the end of time or end of life of the business. So looking at the example 30, you could see the different cash flows that have been provided to us. The next thing we need now to know, we want to identify is which ones are the cost disbursements going out, which ones are the incomes, what the benefits coming in. So if you look at the first one, we'll see its initial investment at time zero. That would be a cost. So it's negative. We've been given the project life to be 10 years. The salvage value, remember when we looked at depreciation, we said that is the money you'll be recouping from selling the equipment, selling the what you've invested the capital on, selling it, what you'll be recouping. So it's a lump sum. So that means it's a benefit. It's a lump sum that will be coming in, so it's a benefit. The next one, annual receipt. So receipt, it's coming in, so it's a benefit. The next one, annual disbursement. So money going out, so that is a cost. So the next thing you want to do for yourself is also to identify, if you remember what we looked at when we were looking at time value of money, calculation of interest. We want to identify, is it an A, is it a P, is it an F? A, annuities, regular incomes, or regular outflows. That's your A. And we talk about P, what is invested at time zero. And we said anything invested, anything coming in beyond time zero, we call it, if it's a once-off thing, we call it an F. So bearing that in mind, let's go over these items once again. So the first one, it's initial investment at time zero. That's definitely a P. The next one, salvage value, will be coming in the future. So that's an F. The next one, annual receipt. So that's an annuity. Remember, regular income every year. So that's an A. And then we also have annual disbursements. This one also goes off every year. So if it goes off every year, it's an annuity. So that's another A. So that's another A we have there. So we've accounted for everything. And then the other thing I want to take note of is this. Take note that the interest rate is otherwise called the discount rate. The reason why it's otherwise in this particular case is referred to as discount rate is, remember, you're bringing all values that have been forecasted into the future. You are bringing them into the present. So that is discounting. So we've been given 3 questions to look at here. What the NPV means, what our decision should be, and what the implication of the NPV value is. So from the previous slide, we've been able to identify. So that means for when we have the annuities and we're looking for the present value, we have annuities. So let's look at this. We have annuities. We're looking for the present value. We'll be using this formula. And where we have for salvage, for example, the salvage value, where we are once off future income coming in, that means we have our F. We want to convert it to P. So for the other ones, the annuities, the receipts, and the disbursements, we have A. We want to convert it to P. So these are the two. Formula we'll be using. So we use where we have A, converting it to A, so converting it to P rather. So we've done that. So this, I haven't used the formula. This is what we arrived at. but salvage value, we arrive at that. Annual disbursement. Remember, for the initial investment, since it's already P, so we are not converting it to anything. So that is that. So the only other thing we've done here is to put negatives for all the cost, and we've put positive for all the benefits. So if you now sum everything, net present, it gives you 8,140. So since it's greater than 0, remember what we said regarding our standards. Since it's greater than 0, it means this investment is acceptable. And what's the implication of this? Because it's not just about calculating, getting a value. You need to know what it means. So what it means is that the project can support a 12% interest rate and still generate a surplus of benefits over costs. After allowing for timing differences, remember time value of money, it will still generate not less than $8,000. So that's the implication of that. So you have another example which is similar to that. I worked it out in the Excel spreadsheet that I provided to you. I shared that with you both on Blackboard and on WhatsApp platform. Please look through the Excel spreadsheet. It's straightforward. It's easy to walk through. So it says an enterprise is investigating purchase of a new truck. You have the interest rate or the discount rate, 9%. First cost, what would this be? This would be a P. Annual operating cost. So what would that be? It would be an A. And if it's operating, that means it's going out. It's a negative. Annual income, since it's annual, that's another A. And since it's coming in, it's positive. And then salvage value, that would be what? That would be F. And since it's coming in, that's another positive. So please work it out. Look through the Excel spreadsheet as we did the previous example. So when you do all those, you have all the benefits. You have all the benefits. So if you have all the benefits, you have all the cost. So you see that what you're going to get is a negative value. So it means you cannot invest in this. You cannot invest in this enterprise. So this is just a summary of everything we've looked at. If NPV is greater than 0, accept. Less than 0, the project should be rejected. If it's equal to 0, we should be indifferent about this, but we need to also consider the issue of the risk. So the only thing that will make us accept this is I haven't considered the risk if it's low, and then if you have all the opportunities of earning. Otherwise, if you don't, this is also going to be a risky business. So those are the reasons why you might want to take this, and also the other reasons that I've indicated here. So e.g. strategic positioning. So you're hoping that in the next, after a period of time, you'll be able to do other things and move on. So that's why you might want to do that. Please, in order to consolidate what we've learned today, go through this video that I've provided for you. It's going to explain it further. So ensure you do that. And if you have any queries, please don't hesitate to send me a message on WhatsApp or via the email, so you can get hold of me to clarify anything we've learned today. Thank you and all the best.